A woman can cry real tears at your father's grave and still know, down to the acre, exactly what she is standing on. I didn't know that yet. On the day this starts, I knew three things, and not one of them was that. My knuckles were split open from a coupling that wouldn't seat. There was orange chert dust in my eyebrows and down the back of my collar, the way there had been most days for 44 years. And my wife had texted me at 4:51 in the afternoon to ask whether the man from the county was coming Thursday or Friday. The man from the county. I didn't know we had a man from the county. I texted her a question mark. She never answered it, and I got busy, and I let it go, and I want you to remember that for later, friend, because I have thought about that question mark more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life. My name is Wade Ledbetter. I'm 63 years old, and I drill water wells out of a cinder block shop on 6 Mile Road outside Maryville, Tennessee, Ledbetter Well and Pump. My father put the sign up in 1979, and I have never had the heart to change the font on it. It's a nothing kind of business. Nobody claps when you do it right. You go out to somebody's dirt, you put a hole in it, and if you know what you're doing, water comes up out of a mountain and into a kitchen sink and nobody thinks about it again for 30 years. That's the job. That's the whole job. But I have to tell you about my father first, friend, or none of the rest of it will make any sense at all. Hollis Ledbetter, 89 years old. He drove a 1994 Chevy C. 1500 with a crack in the windshield that had been there since 2011 and a tailgate that only opened if you knew where to hit it. He lived in the same house on Pistol Creek Road for 52 years. He wore the same brown Carhartt until the collar went to lace, and when my wife bought him a new one for Christmas, he thanked her twice and hung it in the closet and never took it off the hanger. Tara hated that truck. Not the way you'd hate a truck. The way you'd hate a person. Wade. He pulled into the lot at Kroger yesterday and my regional was in the car with me. She said this in the kitchen, not looking up, scrolling. I had to explain him. Do you understand that? I had to explain my father-in-law. I called him back that night before I even got my boots off. Wad. He always stretched it. Warm, slow, like he had all the time in the world, which he did not. You eat, come Sunday. I got beans on. Bring Tara, if she'll come. I looked at her. She was already shaking her head, mouthing no, before I could ask. Soup beans and cornbread out of a cast-iron skillet, eaten off jelly jar glasses at a table with a wobble in it. That wasn't a meal to her. That was a diagnosis. Might just be me, Dad. Suit yourselves, he said. He never once let it land where I could see it. That was the thing about my father. He took disappointment the way that old truck took a washboard road. You'd never know from the outside how much of it was going through the frame. Pull up a chair, friend. Sit a while with me. Everybody in this story got a fair, clean chance to be decent about it, and I want you to notice exactly who took it. Hit that like button while you're settling in, and tell me down in the comments where you're listening from. I read them. All of them. Now, I want to be honest with you about my marriage, because I think some of you are going to hear something in this that you already know, and I'm sorry about that in advance. Tara is 46. I was 57 when we married, 6 years ago, and I'll be straight with you, I was flattered. My first wife had been gone a long time, and I had gotten used to eating standing up over the sink. Tara sold pharmaceuticals to hospital systems, and she was good at it. And she had a company car and an expense account and a way of walking into a room like she'd already read the file on everybody in it. She never yelled. I want you to understand that. In 6 years, that woman never raised her voice to me one time. If you'd had dinner with us, you'd have driven home thinking we were the easiest couple in Blount County. What she did was smaller than yelling. There's a difference between careful and stubborn, she said one night, out of the dark, at 11 o'clock, about nothing. Your daddy's not careful, Wade. He's just scared. He's not scared of anything. Everybody's scared of something. His is spending. She rolled over. That's not a virtue. That's a nerve condition. And I laid there and looked at the ceiling, and I told myself she just wanted better for us. That's all it was. A woman who'd worked her way up from nothing and didn't want to end up like her mother. I told myself that so many times it wore a groove in me. 6 years later, I am still finding pieces of that lie in my pockets. Now here is where I need you to slow down and walk with me, friend, because every single thing that happens later hangs on this one nail. My father was not poor. My father was very likely the least poor man in Blount County, and nobody knew it, including me. Not really. In 1987, he bought 62 acres on Rockhouse Ridge for $9,000, and I know that number because I was 24 and I helped him walk the line of it. It was rock. It was scrub pine and a dry creek and a bench of chert you couldn't grow a tomato in. Everybody in the county thought he'd been taken, but he'd walked that ridge for 2 years before he ever wrote the check. 2 years. Weekends, evenings, with a notebook. A man does not walk a piece of worthless rock for 2 years because he likes the view, and I was 24, and I did not think to ask him why. Tara didn't know about the ridge. Not then. She found out in April. She'd started dropping groceries by his house, the performance of it, the little bags on the porch, the photos she didn't post but definitely took. And one Saturday there was a Tahoe in his driveway with a Nashville plate and a man in it with a folder in his lap. A land agent, not a developer, a hyperscaler. The whole ridgeline is inside a corridor now. TVA transmission running the spine of it, and 150 megawatts looking for somewhere to sit. They offered my father $4.2 million for 62 acres of rock. He said no. And when they came back with a better number, he said no again, and he didn't tell me either time. Tara talked to that man for 20 minutes in the driveway. That's all it took. No, he turned it down. She said it that night with her hands flat on the counter, and her voice was so calm it scared me. Wade. 4.2. He turned it down. Because he's stubborn. Because he'd rather die on a stool in that shop than admit he's been sitting on a lottery ticket for 40 years while his son cleans other people's sediment filters. It's his land. For now, she said. I didn't hear it. God help me, friend. She said it right out loud in my own kitchen, and I did not hear it. My father died on a Wednesday in the first week of October. In the shop behind his house, 89 years old, on the stool, with a jet pump in his lap, half rebuilt. The radio was still going. Earl Whitson from across the road found him at 4 in the afternoon. He'd eaten half a sandwich and set the other half down on a shop rag like he meant to come back to it. I was 240 feet down in a hole in Louisville when my phone went. Tessa Harden took the call. She's 26. She's been my apprentice 3 years, and she's better at 26 than I was at 40. She came and stood at the edge of the pit and didn't say anything. And I looked up at the shape of her against the sky, and I knew. Everything after that came to me through water. People's mouths moved. I caught every third word. We buried him on a Saturday at the little church off Sevierville Road that he'd gone to about every other Sunday for 50 years, because he always said the Lord understood a working man's calendar. 40 people. Somebody's aunt brought a pan of chicken and dressing that could have made you weep on its own merit. 12 families from the north side of that ridge drove down for it. And I remember thinking that was kind of them, and I did not understand why until much later. His truck sat in his driveway all that week. Nobody moved it. Not me. Not anybody. It just sat there with the dust on it. Tara wore black. She hugged the right people. She said he's with your mother now to enough cousins that it started sounding like a line she'd rehearsed in the car. And I didn't notice, because I was drowning. She also stood at the casket and asked my father's attorney a question. I didn't know that at the time. I'd have given a year of my life to have heard it. 11 days after the funeral, I was sitting in the dark in my own front room with the television on and not on, and Tara came in and set her laptop on the ottoman turned toward me. A lake house. Teleco. Dock. Boat lift. 4 bedrooms. 1.6 million. I looked at it for a long moment before it went in. What is this? Something to look at. She sat on the arm of the chair. That's all. We've had a hard month. I want us to have something to point at that isn't a hole in the ground. Tara. He's been gone 11 days. I'm aware of the calendar, Wade. I can't. She was quiet for exactly 1 second. And in that second something moved across her face that I had never seen in 6 years of sleeping next to her. It wasn't grief. It wasn't even impatience. It was colder than either one. Sorrow doesn't earn interest, Wade, she said. Then she picked up her laptop and smoothed her skirt and walked into the kitchen like she'd asked me about the trash. I sat there in the blue light of a television I wasn't watching, and for the first time in my marriage I felt something I could not name. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been a relief. It was closer to the feeling you get when you're standing on a floor and you realize you've never once looked at the joists. The woman asleep in my bed had been running numbers on my father's body, and she had no idea, none, not one thread of a clue that my father had settled this whole thing 11 years before he ever learned her name. She started spending it before anybody told her there was anything to spend. That's the part I still can't get past. She didn't wait for a number. She didn't wait for a lawyer, or a letter, or a single confirmed fact. She just decided, and then she started building. By the end of October, there was a legal pad on my counter she made no effort to hide, and it stayed there, in plain sight, like a dare. "I've been reading," she said. She had her reading glasses on. She had a highlighter. "Inheritance is separate property. Did you know that? It is. In every state. Everybody thinks a wife gets half, and that is just not true." I remember being confused, friend. I remember thinking, well, then what are we even talking about? But it doesn't stay separate. She tapped the pad. "That's the part nobody tells you. You commingle it. You put it in the joint account. You put my name on the deed with yours, and we pay the note out of it, and we buy the truck out of it, and in 6 months it isn't separate anymore. It's marital, and no judge in this state can unscramble it. It's not a trick, Wade, it's just how it works. It's paperwork." And she smiled at me, and I want you to hear this clearly. She wasn't being greedy in that moment. She was being smart. That was a competent plan. That woman had done her homework. And she was sitting in my kitchen explaining to me, patiently, kindly, with a highlighter, exactly how she was going to convert my father into a mortgage. "I'm not doing that." "Ah, you're not doing what? Being married to me?" "I'm not putting my father through a car wash." Now, friend, do you remember the man from the county, the one I didn't know we had? He came on a Thursday. In June, 4 months before my father died. Tara had called the assessor's office and had the parcel lines on Rockhouse Ridge walked and staked. My father was alive. He was 89 and alive and eating half a sandwich in his shop with the radio on, and my wife had a man out there with a GPS rod measuring what she'd get when he wasn't. I found the invoice in a drawer in November. $85. Paid by card. Hers. $85, friend. That's what it cost her to start. It broke on a Thursday night in November. I was rolling the cans down to the road, which is the most ordinary thing a man does in his week, and she came out on the porch with a folder. "We need to talk." I set the can down. She'd found a house. A real one this time. Gated. Out toward Farragut. She had it printed. She had notes in the margin. "We are not buying that." "Why not?" Her voice went up half a step, which for Tara was a scream. "You're about to have $4 million, Wade." "I don't know what I have. Ruth Ann hasn't told me anything." "Then make her." She came down one step. "You know what your problem is? Your problem is loyalty. To a cheap old man who let you crawl around under other people's houses for 44 years with a flashlight in your teeth, while he sat on a fortune he was too small to spend. He could have set you up. He could have set us both up. And instead he died on a stool with a sandwich. And you're standing in your own driveway defending him like that was noble." My ears rang. I mean that literally. Like a slap. "Don't." "Or what?" She stepped closer, and her voice dropped, and it came out flatter and colder than anything I'd ever heard from her. "Wade, listen to me. If you won't mix it, then I'll take half of it the hard way. I'll file, and I'll get half anyway, and you'll have spent 40 grand in lawyers to end up exactly where I'm standing right now." The dog 3 houses down barked. A car went by out on 6 Mile. The world just kept on being the world. I want to tell you what I did next, because it surprised me more than it surprised her. I went inside. I got a glass of water. I sat down across the table from that woman, and I looked her dead in the face and I said, "Violet." She blinked. "Wade, Violet, tomorrow if you want. I'm not going to fight you. I'm 63 years old and I just buried my father and I do not doing it in me to hire a man in a suit to argue about a dead man's dirt. You want out? Go. Take whatever a judge says you get. I'm not going to spend the last thing I've got left of him on a courtroom." I meant it, friend. Every word. I was so hollowed out that fighting felt obscene, like haggling over the price of a casket, and she stared at me for a long time, and what came across her face was not triumph. It was suspicion. "You're just going to let me walk." "I'm going to let you do whatever you think is best for you," I said, and I went to bed. And that one right there, was the first sign I had that laying the gun down does something to a certain kind of person that shooting back never could. Because here's what I've learned about somebody who's spent a month doing arithmetic on a fortune they've never seen a number for. Quiet doesn't read as peace to them. Quiet reads as a trap. She could not imagine a version of me that simply didn't want the fight. So, she went and got the meanest divorce attorney in Knox County, a man named Grant Sheffield, who does high asset work and has a billboard on Kingston Pike with his arms crossed on it. She didn't tell me. I found out from a certified letter that came to the shop. Tessa handed it to me and watched my face. "Boss, you all right?" "Yeah," I said, and the strange thing is I was. Now, first week of December, I sat down to do the shop's books, which I do the second Tuesday of every month with a cup of coffee and the door locked. Ledbetter well and pump operating account, $2,104. I sat there and looked at it for a while. Then I scrolled. $40,000. Wire. To Sheffield's firm. And the joint card $46,000, non-refundable, earnest money on a house I had never seen with my own eyes. Dated 9 days after my father's funeral. 9 days, friend. She put money down on that house 9 days after we put him in the ground. And then she waited 2 more days and showed me a lake house on her laptop like it was a fresh idea. I want to tell you what happened in me right then, because it was not what I expected. There are 2 handprints in the corner of the slab in front of my shop. His and mine. He poured it in 1979, and he made me put my hand down in it before it set, and I was 16 years old and mortified. His is big and flat, and he scratched HL 6 to 79 under it with a nail. That slab is not an asset. That slab is my father. She could have the ridge. I had already given her the ridge. She was not getting the slab. I photographed the screen with my phone, and then I called a lawyer of my own, the first and only aggressive thing I did in this entire story, and I said, "I'm not fighting for my father's land. I'm fighting for a concrete pad and a used mud pump. Can you do that?" He said yes. Before I tell you what happened in that conference room, I want to ask you something, friend, and I want you to actually answer me down in the comments, because I think some of you have been sitting there this whole time with your jaw set. Have you ever had somebody show you who they really were the week after a funeral? Not a year later, not in a fight. That week, while the flowers were still on the table. I know some of you have. Tell me, I'll be reading. Because here's where it turns. The settlement was set for a Tuesday in January, downtown Knoxville, 14th floor. One of those lobbies that smells like money and ambition. She called me the night before. "Tomorrow's it. I hope you're going to be reasonable. I told you. I'm not fighting you." "Good," she said. "Because I already know exactly what I want." And I laid awake all night, and it wasn't fear. I'd made my peace with losing weeks earlier. What kept me up was the look Ruth Ann Pyle gave me at the graveside in October. 60-some years old, my father's attorney for 32 of them, and she had looked at me across that hole in the ground like a woman holding something heavy she wasn't allowed to set down yet. A 63-year-old well driller with an empty folder walked into that room and watched $4 million evaporate in about 11 seconds. And I want to be clear before I tell it, that's not a brag. I walked in there broken and ready to lose. I'd already lost the only thing in that building I wanted. I wore the same shirt I'd worn to bury him. I brought no attorney. I brought a folder with nothing in it but a legal pad I hadn't written on. Tara was already seated in a cream-colored dress, and Sheffield stood up and shook my hand like we were closing on a lake lot. "Where's your counsel?" she asked, looking past me at the door. "Didn't bring one." She and Sheffield exchanged a look. I knew that look. 2 people who think they've already won and are being gracious about it. "Well then," Sheffield said, sitting back. "Let's save everybody some money. My client is prepared to discuss an equitable division, and given the size of the estate, I'm not fighting it," I said. He stopped. "Whatever's in it, the ridge, the house, whatever it is, she can have her share. I just want it done." Tara actually reached over and squeezed his forearm. She couldn't help herself. She lit up like a porch light. That certainly simplifies things, Sheffield said, straightening his tie. If the executor can just provide a formal accounting of estate assets, we can. The side door opened. Ruth Ann Pyle came in with a thin leather folder under her arm. She nodded to the room, sat down at the head of the table, and set her glasses on her nose with the unhurried patience of a woman who had done this exact thing before and knew precisely how it ended. "We'll need the accounting," Sheffield said. "Specifically the Rockhouse Ridge parcel." "Of course," Ruth Ann said. She opened the folder, looked at one page, looked up over her glasses. "Though I should correct a premise first, for the record." Something went up the back of my neck. "There is nothing to divide," Ruth Ann Pyle said. Nobody moved. "I'm sorry, what?" Tara said. "There is nothing to divide." Calm as a full bucket. Hollis Ledbetter did not leave any real property or funds to his son. In 2014, Mr. Ledbetter placed his entire holding, the Ridge parcel, the house on Pistol Creek, the vehicle, all of it into an irrevocable discretionary trust, independently administered. Wade Ledbetter received nothing, because there was nothing to receive. She looked at Tara. Not unkindly, but not 1 ounce of apology in it either. "Legally, Mrs. Ledbetter, my client's son, owns 0% of these assets. He has never owned any percentage of them. There is no separate property to convert, because nothing was ever conveyed to him. Sit with that a second, friend, the way I had to sit with it live. 0. 2014. 4 years before that woman ever learned my last name. My father's soup beans, jelly jars, 52 years in the same house. Hollis Ledbetter had made it so that nothing he owned could ever be reached by anybody coming at me from the side. Not by a court. Not by a wife. Not, technically, by me. Sheffield's face went through 4 things in 2 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, arithmetic. Then something that looked a whole lot like panic. Because he was doing math on his own contingency, and it was coming up 0 too. No. My client did extensive due diligence on the corridor valuation. We built an entire commingling theory on the assumption that funds would be distributed to Mr. Ledbetter and then deposited jointly, Ruth Ann said. "Yes, I imagine you did." She closed the folder. "Counselor, you cannot mix what was never handed over. There was no distribution. There was no check. Not $1 of Hollis Ledbetter's money has ever touched anything with my client's son's name on it, because his father never gave him $1 in his life. He gave me a piece of paper in 2014 and went back to work." Sheffield, quietly. "Mrs. Ledbetter, I think you and I need to step out." "No." Tara's voice cracked right down the center of it. "No." "Who gets it then?" "Somebody gets it." "Who's the beneficiary?" Ruth Ann looked at her for a long moment. "Not you," she said. "I didn't feel triumphant, friend. I want to be honest with you. I sat there, and I did not feel one thing that looked like victory. What I felt was my father in that room, like he'd found a way to reach through 11 years and 1 funeral, and put his hand flat on my shoulder one more time, the way he did. I made it half a block toward the parking garage before I heard her heels behind me. Wade. Wade. I turned around. The mascara had gone. The dress was suddenly too big on her. "You knew," she said, breathing hard. "You and that cheap old man planned this. You let me build a whole life on money that was never there." "I didn't know," I said, and that was the God's truth. "I found out the same minute you did. The difference is, I never threatened to leave you over it." Something in that got through, because her face came apart. 6 years, Wade, her voice broke. "Doesn't that count for anything? Are you really going to walk away from everything we built?" And I looked at her, friend, and I want to tell you what I felt, because it wasn't rage. It was nothing. Just a tired kind of quiet. "We didn't build anything, Tara," I said. "You were waiting on something to close. I just didn't want to see it." I didn't wait around for the answer. I walked. Ruth Ann caught up with me in the garage. "Wade, give me 2 minutes." She put her folder on the hood of somebody's Buick. "There is one lifetime beneficiary of that trust," she said. "It's you." I just stood there. I said you don't own it. You don't. It's discretionary. I'm the trustee, and I decide what gets distributed, to whom, and when. On paper you have nothing. That's the entire point. That's why she couldn't take half of it. You cannot divide a discretion. So I could have. You could have asked me for anything you wanted, any day of the last 11 years, and gotten it, she said. So could she. That's what nobody understands about these. It's not a vault, Wade. It's a judgment. Your father's only standing instruction, until this past March, was that I meet the family and use my own. And then she said the thing I will hear until they put me in the ground. I met your wife in October, Wade, at your father's casket. She stood over that man's body and asked me what the ridge would go for. Ruth Ann looked at me. She asked me that before she asked me my name. Then she took out one more page. A letter of wishes, non-binding guidance a man leaves his trustee, dated the 4th of March, 7 months before he died. The last thing my father ever wrote. Ruth Ann, my son will come and ask you for money for his wife. He'll do it kind and he'll mean it. Don't give her $1. In 6 years, that woman has never asked me one question about my son that wasn't really a question about my ridge. Give Wade whatever he needs and nothing she can touch. He'll get there. He's slow about people, but he gets there. And then Ruth Ann told me why the wall was there in the first place, and it was not what I thought. Wade, your father didn't put that ridge in trust to keep it from Tara. He didn't know Tara in 2014. She said it very gently. He put it in trust to keep it from you. From me. From you, and from your children, if you'd had any. Because he knew that someday somebody was going to drive up that road and offer a Ledbetter more money than a Ledbetter could turn down. She took her glasses off. There's an aquifer on the north side of that ridge. 60 feet. Your father drilled every well in that valley for 60 years. He knew whose water it was before anybody else on earth did. 12 families drink out of it. That company wanted the ridge for the line and the water, and they'd have pumped it flat in 9 years. She folded the page. He didn't build that trust to protect $4 million, Wade. He built it so that no Ledbetter would ever be legally able to say yes. 12 families drove down for his funeral, friend. I remember thinking that was kind of them. I read his letter alone, that night, on the tailgate of that ugly truck in his driveway on Pistol Creek. Ruth Ann had handed it to me sealed, my name across the front in that blocky left-leaning hand I'd know anywhere in this world. Wade, if Ruth Ann gave you this, then somebody came for it and you found out the hard way what I was doing all those years. You thought I was just tight. I liked her fine, son. I never had one thing against that woman personally. But a wall doesn't have to know who's coming. That's what a wall is for. Go back to work. Take Tessa up on the ridge and teach her how to read it. Water's on the north side, 60 foot down, and it's the best I ever found in my life. Dad, I sat on that tailgate and I cried like a child, 63 years old, in the dark, in my dead father's driveway, and I didn't wipe it off. Now here's where you'd expect me to gloat. I couldn't. Grief doesn't leave room for it. But friend karma doesn't need me to gloat. Karma does its own paperwork. Judge Marion Teague read the dates out loud in February. That's all he did. He just read them. $46,000 of earnest money, 9 days after the funeral. $40,000 wired to Grant Sheffield out of an account with Ledbetter well and pump printed across the top of it. Sheffield had already withdrawn. She showed up with an appointed attorney and the same cream dress. Malicious dissipation of marital assets. The court ordered every cent of my shop money returned and assigned 100% of that mountain of debt to her name alone. Ruth Ann Pyle sat in the back row of that courtroom the whole time, taking notes, and I watched Tara turn around and see her and understand all at once, right there, that the woman she'd been rude to over a casket had been the entire story from the beginning. Last I heard, she's back selling, 2 territories now, running the interest. The regional she was so worried about explaining my father to found out she was broke. Nobody returns the calls. And Ruth Ann Pyle distributed exactly 1 asset to me that afternoon. She did the paperwork on the hood of it, in the courthouse lot, with a pen she borrowed off me. A 1,994 Chevy C. 1,500. 200 and 18,000 miles. Tailgate that only opens if you hit it in the right place. The only thing that woman ever called an embarrassment. I drove it home with the windows down. The ridge is still rock. It'll be rock in 100 years. And 12 families up on the north side will still be drinking out of it and never once thinking about it, which is precisely what my father paid $9,000 for in 1987. I took Tessa up there in April and showed her how to read the bench. She's got the scholarship now, the first one. Ruth Ann named it for him. Trade school kids. Hands only, no essays. My father never handed me $1 in his life, friend. Not one. He handed me a wall I couldn't see, and then he stood behind it for 40 years and never once asked me to thank him for it. That's not an inheritance. That's a father. If this one got you, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments where you're listening from. I'll see you on the next one. For 60 years Hollis drilled wells nobody ever thanked him for, and 12 families up on that ridge still drink his water without knowing his name. That's not a sad thing. That's the shape most real good takes, quiet, unsigned, still working long after you've gone. Do one thing today that nobody will ever know was you. It counts. It's already counting. A small note before you go. This story was imagined and fictionalized by AI, written purely to entertain you for a little while, and to leave a good thing behind that the kindness nobody sees is still doing its work.